are loaded into the game, so I cannot wait. And spawning in the top left-hand side of the map, the Italian stallion for Clash, it is Reynor.
Waving to all of his fans out there, of course. But standing in his way, a much more calm player, a little bit older, a bit more experienced, and incredibly famous for the feats that he has achieved on the international stage. In the bottom right, in the red, the Protoss, representing the Africa Freaks, it's Stats.
What an interesting choice. I guess most maps get played, but Submarine, not usually a map that makes it through the vetoes. Stats is going to start with a very quick hatch block, as is to be expected, and Reynor did not open 12 pool, which is maybe one of the strategies that you would most anticipate on a map like this.
Indeed. Definitely a map where those aggressive builds can get across a bit faster, but Stats, of course, did scout after the gateway, taking a few little safety precautions. And there's been a lot of chatter about Void Rays and Nidus Worms and all of that. Well, you know, this is the smallest map in the pool, and this is probably going to play a lot differently to many of the other maps in this series, Cats. I wonder if there's one map where I don't hate the Soul Stroll, you know, the build where you walk your queens across the map. This might actually be it.
Is that the German taxi without the taxi type thing, right? Like I think queens, yeah. I think the queens are gonna be able to walk across this map very easily. Ravagers and Roaches also not particularly fast units. So yeah, I could very much see that, and it's a lot of what we have been seeing from Reynor. Though, like the desk was mentioning accurately, it's not really been working out so well for him.
No, mixed success in terms of his transitions, but the initial attacks did not work out well, and in fact, it was Zest who absolutely squished it. You know, Zest really did a schooling on Reynor in their series in the group stage, and he, of course, was the Void Ray King, but we haven't got there yet. We saw a lot of Protoss players pivot into different styles. Showtime, Trap, Neeb. Many of them showed things like just doing Oracle openings, Glaive Adepts, going up into either Blink Stalker Colossus or Chargelot Storm. You know, there was a big variety of plays coming out, and I feel like as much as I'm thinking about, you know, Swarm Hosts, those sort of styles pushing across the map, there are many different options available, and I think both players know that there is a lot of respect shared between the two, and they're both going to be looking to get as much information as possible so they can adapt on the fly.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up different Protoss styles, because while it is true that both players will be adapting on the fly, they both kind of have their trademark strategies. And I think for Stats, a lot of that he does differently than other Protosses is he uses oftentimes, especially when he opens target, not the case in this game perhaps, but when he opens target, he uses a lot more static defense than other Protosses. He has cannons, he has shield batteries just about in every base, which usually nets him a disadvantage in terms of supply, but keeps him very safe. So I'm really scared for Reynor trying out those mid-game aggressions against a Stats that opens target later in the series.
Indeed, he's a player who, especially if we see Death Aura come out later in this series, you don't want to be attacking into Stats on Death Aura. He doesn't die on that map, not to a conventional push. You've really got to catch him off guard. But for now, Glaive Adept opening from Stats. He's going up into the 4 gateways, the Robo, and feels like we're going to be seeing the sharp Glaive Adept attack. And many transitions on from that. I feel like the one that we see most commonly is where once the attack gets underway, the Protoss will start resuming probes, take their 4 gases steadily, and then just move out to take a 3rd base after a few Immortals and Sentries.
Yeah, of course, there's also potential DT transitions later on, and they can happen kind of at any time, right? Instead of a warping, you might get DT. So Reynor has to be on the lookout for that. He has to know how many units are coming at all times. Now this, at best, is a timing that hits at 420, so we see Stats is not exactly on point on that regard.
And he's lost 2 Adepts already, trading that out for just a few Zerglings. That's really good for Reynor. Of course, they didn't have the upgrade yet, and Zerglings are really bad once you get a lot of Glaive Adepts all together covering each other. But if you catch just 1 or 2 early, they go down very quick. And now 6 Adepts, not quite the same threat as a solid 8. The Queen's not going to be as worried about that. The ability to snipe down the Queens isn't really there. And that's going to give time for those Roaches to start to trickle out.
Yeah, we see the Lynx already pre-positioned at the ramp to avoid the first shade, and that's their job. Now that the Roaches are out, they are the backbone, but I don't know if I like this Lynx engaging up at the front. They are better off perhaps chasing after these shades, but now with the Roaches, Stats is not going to want to commit onto that, and Reynor resumes droning. Beautiful.
Yep, 42 probes for the Protoss. Stats 39 for Reynor. As Stats, of course, unable to secure a third base, but does take an economic lead, as is standard with this matchup of builds. The question is, can he keep some sort of threat up or hit some sort of follow-up push? Ooh, got to watch out there. But fantastic Prism Micro, as always. Stats, I mean, if there's one thing that sets him apart, it's no man is left behind. As long as Stats has a Warp Prism out, his army just becomes way stronger. He's always shuffling his units in and out. It almost got him out of a very nasty series in the group stage against Cure, where his Stalkers just would not go down. It was like 4 red hit point Stalkers popping in and out of a Prism at light speed. I mean, he is just one of the best in the world when it comes to controlling that Warp Prism.
He sure is. Already finding a little bit of a slowdown on that creep as well is going to be nice for him. So the Observer doing work here, trying to stall things out so that Reynor doesn't easily find those timings onto the third of Stats that he is now establishing. The Warp Prism, however, has very low HP, and so it has to back. That's kind of its lifeline.
It's a pretty late third, and we don't see any lights flashing on those Nexus. There's no probes building right now. That is a fake third if I've ever seen one, Cats. Stats here on 44 probes. I believe it's 3 Immortals, a couple of Sentries, and a whole lot of Adepts. We're going to see a huge commitment to an attack. Stats is going to try and come across this short map and kill Reynor, but Reynor is on a rather conservative work account for now, as long as he's building an Evo and more drones at exactly the wrong time. He was so safe before this, but he hasn't even realized this move out's coming. He needs to make Ravages right now.
Yeah, and he's going to start morphing 3, but that's going to be difficult. Where is the Warp Prism? Those Ravagers are very good from Reynor. He is an expert at sniping those Warp Prisms and looking for them with the Ravagers. However, with this many sentries, you also want the Ravagers to break force fields. So let's see what happens. Reynor reinforcing with Lynx. That is the unit that's going to make its way quickest, and going to get a cancel on the third, which grants him a win condition should he hold the attack.
Indeed, keeping Stats definitely locked in with no plan of transition, but that's a scary army. There's still a fair number of force fields. The Queens, though, so much transfused, doing a great job tanking those Biles, breaking those force fields down. The Observer gets sniped by the Spore Crawler. Now, all these Queens do get trapped up front, but that's the end of the force fields for now. Reynor's going to pull back for the moment. He's going to try and rally some more units together. He's only got 5 Ravagers there, but if those Corrosive Biles can connect, then maybe he can get through the Adepts and get to those Immortals, which are the real damage dealers.
Yeah, lovely Link counter attack. He's gonna be buying damage, Reynor, or buying time, Reynor that is, while the Links force out units or try to force out Warpins on the other side. Stats getting adventurous, actually jumping on top of the army of Reynor. I was not expecting that move, but he deems that he has enough, and he is going for it, Piggy.
What an absolute madman. I cannot believe it, but you know what? The Immortals are able to focus the Roaches, the Adepts are able to gun down
those Biles
instantly.
Oh, it misses!
Oh no, he needs it, but the Prism just repositions just like that. The Prism does not even care. And you know what? Those Immortals are never going to go down. The Prism falls, but only once Reynor loses all of his units, and Reynor there did not scout this push coming. He didn't even scout it moving out at first until it was knocking on his door, and Reynor caught in the midst of transitioning into more workers. A mistake that's going to cost him the first game in the series.
Yeah, difficult to blame him. I have full vision, and I didn't scout this one coming big, so it's definitely a rough one. And Stat starting with the mind games and playing against his reputation, or at least leveraging his reputation to try and do something aggressive in the first game in a map that very much makes sense. Bringing the aggression to Reynor, you have to love it.
And it all comes off the back of him maintaining pressure. You don't set up for a push like that. We mentioned Reynor needed to kind of figure out what was happening and scout it. It's hard to do that when there's a Warp Prism poking around, picking off all of your creep tumors, just constantly coming into your face, looking for drone kills. He kept Reynor so busy with that Reynor was not able to look for more information. He wasn't able to realize, hey, wait a second, there is a huge attack coming out behind this. And you know what? That's just a fantastic setup. It's the way you want to start a series in a Protoss vs. Zerg.
It really was fantastic, and I was feeling so good for Reynor as well after picking off the 2 Adepts. Like you mentioned at the start, the first wave of the Adepts not doing really anything, and he started droning back up at a very sharp timing. If he had just caught wind of the move out, I feel like he wouldn't have made those extra 7 drones at the very end, towards the tail end of the game, and that might have just been enough. And Stats, I mean, that shade was also so beautiful from him, because Reynor was really expecting to be able to pull back those links that he had on offense to help with the defense. He just wanted to force out some Warpins, and once those Warpins are on the side of Stats, guaranteed those links go back to help with the defense. But Stats seizing the opportunity before any of that comes into play.
and putting some fear into your opponent, making them worry about what you might commit to. It's always good to mix these strategies in, and that was the perfect map to it. If there was ever a map where you want to play it with a little bit of extra safety, that last one is it. And that's why I kind of feel like Submarine is Serral's stomping ground. You know, it's this great map for someone who's maybe a bit more conservative. For someone like Reynor, who likes to take some risks and hope he can get away with it, well, Reynor does get punished in the first map, but you can see that he's still G'd up. He's still singing to himself that Italian rap, channeling some energy. And I doubt a single map loss is going to get under either of these players' skins.
Yeah, unlikely. I mean, you know that Reynor is in his A game when he's not wearing just the hat, but also the hoodie on top, you know? And if that wasn't enough, I'm really concerned for him. I think at the start of the broadcast, or before the broadcast even started, you were saying this was going to be a very difficult matchup for Reynor, whereas I thought that Reynor would have an easier time than Stats. I thought that Reynor was the favorite going into this.
And you would not be at a crime for that, because let's be real, this guy has an amazing head-to-head in recent history, but he's starting out 0-1 in this series. It's a best of 5. Can he bring it back? Representing Clash in the top left-hand side, he is Reynor.
And you could argue this is kind of his playground. It is Death Aura to follow things through for the Africa Freaks Protoss player, Stats.
You described his strategy very well earlier in the mid-game. It's cannons and batteries into more cannons and batteries, supported by High Templar, and then some more shield batteries and some more cannons. If you let him take control of this map, he's going to cover it in static defenses and work his way forwards. Stats is a master of the slow game, the methodical game, but he can definitely get some movement out there and hit some sharp timing attacks as well. And you know, there was talk on the desk of Reynor making miraculous comebacks with Mass Ravager, but it's often in a situation where you shouldn't really ever want to be in that situation as a Zerg player. Yeah, it was cool when he killed, was it like 7 of Zest's Void Rays with 1 round of Corrosive Biles the other day, but he still lost the game because he was in a terrible scenario. So it's very much, I think, about the opening momentum in Zerg vs Protoss, and it's about very minute adjustments where you can cut a corner to get ahead. You know, if you know he's not going Oracle, skip the Spore Crawler. If you know he's not going to come with the depths, skip the Roach Warren for an extra 30 seconds, get a few more drones out. Those little adjustments are going to just pay massive dividends as the game goes on.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to that same point, I think that if he analyzed Stats' play, and if he knows that there is those static defense coming, a lot of the time I think that what you could do against something like that is kind of just let him get away with it, skip through the mid game, and jump maybe not into a late game, but a very heavy mid game where you have a huge timing where you don't care as much about those static defense. Of course, you'll have to put up with Storm, but I don't know, maybe Lurkers or something of the sort could be an answer, because this Hydra Bane or Ravager timings with Queens and such, they just haven't been working too well against what Stats does.
And it's going to be a Stargate build here for Stats in map number 2. Up in the main base, if we do see a Void Ray or 2 coming out, we saw in the group stage that triggered an immediate just 68 drone mass Queen Roach Nidus response from Reynor, but it often wasn't the right call there. So I'm curious to see, you know, does Stats commit to the Void Rays? Is it a single Void Ray? How is Reynor going to change his adaptation now that we're in the bracket?
We'll have to see, and he has to be so much more cautious after that first game as well. I feel like if Reynor had been playing against, say, Trap or Zest, or a player that has a little bit more range than Stats, or than you would think Stats has, right? A little bit more of that potential for aggression. Maybe Reynor is a little bit more cautious with the scouting. Maybe he puts a little bit more chips on the units early on. But Stats really catching him off guard last game. Now Reynor has to be aware of a range of possibilities. He has to really be scouting over and over and find out whether it is going to be one Void Ray, whether it is going to be a second Stargate.
Yeah, I'd expect an Oracle after that, and indeed it is. But the Overlord's not going to see that. Void Ray is going to come over. As long as it turns on its prismatic alignment, the Overlord just disappears without getting any real information, other than the fact that there's a Void Ray on the map and a very quick third base right on 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Reynor's not going to commit anything to try and deny that, knowing that the Void Ray, the Adept, kind of positioned between the pylon, and any future Oracles are going to keep that completely safe.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit worried though. There is one spore coming. I'd like to see the position of that spore, but Stats might just stay defensive with this Oracle. All right, it looks like there's additional spores now coming up as well, so Reynor anticipating that there could be something, and good queen positioning as well in every base that doesn't have a spore. So never mind, no concerns here.
That second Stargate definitely makes it look like we're going to be seeing the heavy Void Ray play. However, there may be a little idea that Zest threw out where swap into Mass Phoenix, lure the queens into the open with 2 Void Rays, Phoenix swoop on in, pick them up. I doubt Reynor would fall for it twice in the same tournament, but that was a pretty devastating loss that he had in that one.
Yeah, good reaction here from Reynor, as you might expect, even with the Spore trick. I don't think that's actually efficient, but it is nice in the sense that you don't have to worry about that drone later on and putting it back to mining.
Yeah, only costs a couple of minerals there, and just gives you a nice little bit of efficiency in terms of the APM and the attention. As the Roach Warren goes down, 3 more gases, Evolution Chamber. And that Oracle really trying to make use of this space in the back of the base to be as annoying as possible. It's going to take a bunch of damage for it.
Yes, sir. And this drone this time around will get trapped, but honestly, that grants him a little bit more minerals, though it is near irrelevant. They are both very close to each other, and they're both responses, making the Spore or not. Now, Stats is transitioning into a Robo for the time being, as well as the Archives here. So, what do you think we're going to see, Piggy? Are we going to see Storm here after this?
Yeah, I think we'll definitely see probably a quick Storm, but he might just actually go straight to Robo Bay and get Disruptors, simply because he's seen such heavy Queen style from Reynor, and classically Stats' response to players who kill him with Queens is to swap into Disruptor play. That being said, Templar Archives goes down there, so maybe going to stick with Storm. He had a really cool series against Solar a few weeks back where Stats actually was just dying to these mass Queen Ravager Baneling pushes, and in the final game he was like, that's it, I'm going to go Storm and Disruptors, and just, you know, I can't take a 4th base, I'm just going to sit here, turtle up, and you're not going to be able to break in. But here it looks more like a traditional progression. It's just, you know, a couple less Void Rays than you might go for in some options. Gives him faster charge, faster +1, nice quick route straight towards Storm. And both players just getting situated in the late game. We're going to get to see players in their optimal setting, and let's see who's got the advantage in that late game scenario.
Yeah, I suppose we will. And I am a little bit concerned already for Reynor. Stats not taking the forward 3rd base, but the one to the left. And that's going to make it so that he also has another 3rd base on the high ground that he can easily secure later on as well. And yeah, I mean, he's going to have Storm, and he's going to have all of the usual suspects in terms of static defense here. Oh! Templar getting surrounded. That's nice.
Yeah, that was a brave High Templar. He didn't check the stats on his damage output. He just said, hey, match came out a while back. I've got an attack now. It does 5 damage. It's not really worth anything. It's basically a worker's attack, mate. But Stats now secures the 4th base. Moving on up to that, the Immortal production continuing. And 21 Roaches building for Reynor. So this is kind of his safety in the mid-game. Lots of Queens. He's going to add a whole pack of Roaches, and then he's going to try to get up to the Lurker Viper. Interestingly, though, no second Evo chamber. I'd really love to see some Carapace upgrades, because this scenario often goes to carriers up against Hydras and Queens. Carapace upgrades is so important in that scenario.
Yeah, you'd be perfectly right about that. Do you think we could see even some Infestors here, or is that going to be out of the question?
Well, if he wants to win every game with ease like Rogue did in the group stage against Stats, then yeah, absolutely. Microbial Shroud apparently is pretty good, but hey, you know what? These Roaches are going to run forward. They're going to get a couple of Archons. But man, Prismatic Alignment says, no, that's not worth it. That is a very good trade for Stats.
And we look at the units lost tab really quick to get a good idea for what that was. And yeah, the Prism at least getting shoot away, so that's pretty nice. And it's not so bad for Reynor on the resources lost tab. And he did get rid of a lot of gas units, so even though it's not an efficient trade per se, he did get rid of 2 Archons, and he did get rid of that initial Templar, where Stats has been spreading his gas thin across multiple techs. So it's not the worst thing. And talk about multiple techs. Here comes the Fleet Bacon.
Tasty, tasty. Guaranteed to come with extra salty Zerg tears in most games, but this is Reynor and he's prepared. I don't know if we're going to be getting that auto win it gets in Platinum League on the ladder, mate. It's going to be a bit of work, and Reynor's already coming across, and he's actually going to do the lurker push. Ooh, he's going to do... Oh, wow. Lambo's talked about this build quite a bit. It's just immediately you're going to have seismic spines. That's the range upgrade kick in, and that allows you to siege down cannons and static defenses. You got Mass Queen Hydra behind it. It's a very scary push. I don't think there's any Vipers on the map, which means he's not going to be able to yoink any units, but this is cool because Storm is not very effective against lurkers. You've got so much transfuse, you can just heal them right up.
Yeah, I really like it, and this is kind of what I was talking about at the start of the game. This is what I wanted to see from Reynor, because it kind of skips through that mid-game, and instead of running head-on to the static defense, you run on to the static defense and you siege it yourself. So this looks really good. There's a lot of roaches preoccupied back at Reynor's house there, so they need to make their way across the map, but this Zealot's being a nuisance. A lot of spine crawlers, however, have been made to greet them, and this is looking decent so far for the Italian Stallion.
Indeed, he's doing great right now. He's just running on forwards and pushing through big storms, landing, and those queens are getting a little low on energy. You got to be careful. Immortal Charge Lock comes forward. Stats is going to go for the bust. The queens are still providing a meat shield though, and there's a lot of lurker damage in a perfect arc. You can see all the lurkers are firing at once. The queens there covering it. This is looking great.
Yeah, and there was Hydras in production, which I can understand because there's still the threat of the double Stargate, I suppose. But I really wanted to see circling reinforcements, because if we look at the army of stats, it cannot deal with circlings right now. The roaches actually finding their way into a fourth that seems to have been a little bit greedy, especially with that much static defense allocated there from stats. Battery overcharge will come here to try and save the Immortals, but at the same time the roaches move into the natural base, and here come the circlings. Immortals are not going to be particularly good against those, and things are falling apart for the Shield of Fire.
Yeah, great push here. It looks like you're just rushing to the late game. Stats isn't really worried about anything coming his way, and then bam, surprise, a Lurker Queen Hydra timing. That's Carriers arrive on the battlefield a little bit too late there, as he's already lost his third base, and the game, Reynor ties up the series 1-1.
Huge fan of this approach, specifically against what Stats has been doing throughout the tournament, right, Piggy? It's just such a defensive style and such a I'm not gonna die to your Queen Ravager timing style from Stats that we see that I think you can really abuse it by kind of skipping a step there.
Yeah, I feel like definitely it's scary when those queens come forward, because I mean, you look at these units that you want to use. Immortals, kind of great versus roaches, great versus lurkers. You've obviously got all sorts of different units that you want to be using. Carriers coming out, awesome. +1 carrier is really good. Not when there's a pack of queens with hydras behind them. So it really is something where the queens present such a tanky problem. They're not armored units, so they don't take bonus damage from anything. I feel like disruptors are almost always the thing you want as a Protoss player. When you're looking at an army that is that slow and immobile, even just 2 disruptors is going to pick away at that so well.
Yeah, I think that would be the adaptation on the side of Stats. Disruptors would be amazing, and Disruptors are such great units against aggression. They are not so good on offense because you can always kite them back, but on defense it's difficult for them to push into them, right? Because you got a Nova coming your way, especially if you have units that need to stay grounded like the Lurkers do and like the Queens essentially do.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because you get this weird matchup of different things the players are doing to try and take each other out. In this scenario, it's an incredibly immobile army of Queen Lurker, but it's like almost more mobile than the Protoss, because the Protoss, we've been talking about it, well, half of their fighting force seems to be buildings, and that's not the most effective.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is, right? You're sieging buildings with building killers essentially in the Lurkers, and the Queens just have so much HP to go around. I loved this approach from Reynor. I am looking forward to this next game. He continues to be pumped, and we are tied up heading into Oxide. Spawning in the bottom left-hand side, the blue Zerg player for Clash. It is Reynor.
And his opponent up here in the top right-hand side of the map, the Protoss player. It is now tied up 1-1. Let's see if he can make it to late game again. It is Stats.
again for the first time in the series, and I am excited to see a late game from Stats. But do you think Reynor is going to give him the opportunity at all?
Ooh, I don't think Reynor wants to let anyone get anywhere for free. I don't think he's necessarily doesn't want to go there, but he's going to try and do stuff to you before then. And especially if you're doing something that is so fundamentally inactive, I guess, as like these Void Ray to 4-base Storm, you know, straight to carrier openings. I mean, Reynor is a guy who engages in the most dynamic form of StarCraft. It's the form where you always have a pack of bitey boys, aka Zerglings, looking for a hole in the wall and often finding one, you know. He's a guy who's going to try and slide some drops in the back, some Baneling drops. He's going to, I mean, he's even capable of pulling out like a Ragnarok-style build where you just go drop a bunch of Queen Hydra in their main base while pushing their third at the same time. Reynor is not just going to let Stats play the most comfortable, straight up to 90 probe 4-5 base game.
Yeah, you're completely right about that. He's one of the fastest players in the game, and he is extremely intelligent. He can really leverage that speed in order to kind of, you know, be like, hey, I got this much APM, this much actions to spare. Can you match me? And if you cannot, then you're going to be falling behind. He knows that, and that is exactly what he's going to be looking for. You're completely right.
Pylon going up in the main. Stats definitely going to be hiding his tech there somewhere, where if you go in with a slow Overlord, it is a one-way trip. His probe, of course, was being annoying on the other side of the map, but does accidentally pick up a couple of minerals there. It's timing when the Zerglings are almost out anyway, so the probe does want to back on off. And of course, we don't even really mention the third base being taken by the Zerg anymore, do we? Because it's just become completely standard. I mean, the Zerg just clicks their drone there. And in the 1 in 5 games where there's not a probe, they're like, oh, cool, I can turn around and go just take my natural, why not?
Yeah, it's almost like a free advantage, it feels like, from the Zerg perspective when it doesn't get blocked. But yeah, I mean, most Zergs don't even bother checking if there's a probe. They just send the drone straight to their third, and then if there isn't a probe, that's when you reroute, right? Like, instead of the other way around, if there is a probe, I should reroute. It's like, yeah, the response is if there isn't a probe.
Yep, that's where we're at, 2021, you know, 11 years into StarCraft 2, and there have been strange twists and turns in the meta along the way, and right now we're in the Zerg isn't allowed to take their natural expansion meta. Dep's going to dive in. Stats always does this really safe, and he gets a Zergling, not a bad start. So yeah, good start for him as he opens immediately with a Void Ray once again. He really wants to keep Reynor in the dark.
Yeah, but I'm a little bit concerned for Stats now, because I feel like Reynor just showed a style that is going to be consistently good against what Stats was doing. So it's kind of on Stats, I think, now to adapt. The first game, it really was the kind of like a trick, right? It was a trick that I did not expect to see coming from Stats in that first game, an Immortal all-in on the back of that Adept pressure at the start. But now in the second game, that was his go-to, that was his bread and butter, and it got completely shattered by the Italians. So I think that Stats is going to have to mix it up somehow, some way. I'm not sure how. I like your idea of Disruptors, for example, to adapt.
Indeed, and I honestly, if I had to predict without seeing what I see as a, you know, the map pack right now, observer with the bird's eye view, I would say I think he does the same thing with that, but it's not actually the case. We're going to see really fast glaives. So Stats is going to dive up to Adept Glaives. He's just trying to distract Reynor right now. Reynor's well positioned, doesn't take any real damage, just a couple Zerglings. But this is an incredibly quick glaive Adepts. Now, what I'm curious to see is how much do you commit to it? You've shown the quick third base. What Parting often does with this build is he'll even show himself taking 1 or 2 gases on his third base and fake it out to make it look more like a macro build. Stats has done that on his natural. It would be too early to take it on the third anyway. So it looks like a macro transition. He's not going to do like an 8-gate. It looks like a just 4-gate glaive Adept. So a pretty tough pressure for Reynor to handle, especially if he's skipping his Roach Warren until so late as he is now. But this is not a Haas move. This is not the 8-gate variety.
Yeah, which is I'm almost disappointed at that. I mean, the one Void Ray is kind of a mind game in itself, because you're not really getting any more value out of that Stargate for the time being. And now we see Reynor double checking for Adepts as he took care of a couple of Adepts on his side of the map, then spotted 2 more Adepts moving out of Stats' base and 1 at the wall off. So he had to be aware that there is something coming, and now he knows that there is something coming. So he is going to make a Spine Crawler, but the Roach Warren is not yet finished.
That's 9 Adepts. He's pulled every single one of these 7 Queens to the front. Now the Queens...
Oh!
Oh no! There was a hole! The Great Wall of Italy falls just like that. It had a giant hole in it. I know what those Germans were saying about Italian engineering this whole time, mate.
Oh god. Yeah, and now the Adepts are gonna find their way into the main and between those mineral cracks. So it's not gonna be too easy for Reynor to clean this up. Now Roaches are making their way onto the field. So with that and the Queens, they are gonna be able to push this Adepts back. But at this point, I think Reynor has taken a lot of damage, a lot more than he was expecting to take to this poke. 11 drones have gone down, though the Adepts now really kiting those lings. A lot of them are gonna lose their lives, and they're gonna shade onto Queens, and this is just about perfect for Reynor, who really needed a win off of this.
Yeah, he should take out 2 of those Adepts. He does indeed. 11 workers go down in the end, as well as a lot of lost mining time for Reynor there to go for a 4 evolution chamber wall on top of his Roach Warren and not realize there was an opening. That really was a disaster. I mean, what would have been a really cool kind of scramble to get his defense together turns into a situation where now Reynor just has to play this game from a little bit behind.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that could have been so good if that Wolof was finished, and it's not a mistake that you expect from Reynor, right? It's so surprising that the Adepts shade in as they did, but yeah, now there's a Blink transition. This is not too common, at least not that I've seen. Can you walk me through this one, Piggy?
Not 100% sure, mate. We'll see exactly.
It's weird, right?
Like, yeah, I feel like there's, you know, you get in these series where there's so many mind games because they've both studied each other's games up to this point, and some of the stuff just goes over my small brain. You know, I sometimes it'll take me a few times watching the replay before I fully understand.
All right, well, I'd like to see something like a Colossus transition or something to back these Blinkstalkers up, because, I mean, Blinkstalkers, as good as they have been historically, in the current place in the meta, they really aren't that great. Because of the Ravagers, the Roaches are gonna have a tool to deal with the force fields, which is kind of the Blinkstalker's best friend, because the Blinkstalker is the type of unit that really thrives off of not dying, right? Off of staying alive, off of microing, and you know, the zoning tool is the Sentry. So this is kind of an old school army comp. But now we have Ravagers. I mean, for the last very many years we have Ravagers. So this hasn't really worked out too well in a few years, I would say.
Well, you know, I love Reynor. He is so good when he's behind. He makes some incredible comebacks. It's the same reason why he's so good at Zerg vs. Terran. He knows he's behind right now. He's like, dude, that is a scary army. It wants to fight me and trade right now. Cancels his 4th on the left, retakes a 5th even before canceling the 4th base. And now he's in full army production. He's just trying to survive. He's trying to wait for that +1 range upgrade. He wants to try and bait out as many of these force fields and kind of burn down the energy of the Protoss army before the fight really comes to grips.
Yes, indeed. Roaches and Ravagers in production, and once that fight does come to grips, as you've described it, I think that we're going to see a lot of links in production to try and reinforce. Even a Spine being positioned here, some force fields being dropped, not much being lost on either side, and more force fields being used on the side of Stats, who is kind of, I don't know, he spent like 6 or 7 force fields so far, and he hasn't found too much in return.
Mass Stalker is not a composition that scales too well into the latter stage, but right now Stats has such a big army. I still feel like he's got an opportunity, but he might feel forced to trade, and the problem is if you force your wave too far forward on creep, those fights can become very inefficient. So Stats right now, swapping into some Zealots, he's adding some High Templar, some Storm, a 4th base. I like to see that transition on the way, because if he keeps making Stalkers, he's kind of forced to just headbutt. He's got to trade the units aggressively, because they'll expire, they'll become useless later in the game.
Yeah, and look at this. Reynor already with a bunch of units positioned in his high ground in case there was a blink or something of the sorts over there. So he really has a ton of units. Now Reynor is in a position where his army is not going to scale that well. He is getting Baneling speed so that he can fill up and make his army a little bit more complex and more expensive overall in time. But I think he's still going to be looking to trade, maybe to try and collapse onto this 4th base.
It's an odd composition for Stats at this point. I still think he's advantaged. Stalkers are a good generic useful unit, but he's got to get that High Templar count up. He's got to add that splash damage to it. And it's a pretty complicated army because you want to kind of blink back weak Stalkers. You also want to land force fields and you want to Size Storm. And if you do that all correctly, I mean, you've now got an amazing anti-Baneling, anti-Zergling tool. Baneling speed isn't even ready. Zealot drop goes in the main.
Oh, the blink!
Oh my lord, that's got to be a mistake.
Yeah, but instead, it's going to be perfect force fields to follow, and what a storm onto all of those Banelings. Beautiful moves here to recover from that blink. on the side of Stats. Still, it's going to be very difficult to push onto this many Ravagers, and Reynor has to be a little bit more patient. At the same time, there was a couple of warpins into the main, those Banelings collapsing onto a lot of these Stalkers, though they are Stalkers. I mean, they got patched. One of the most recent patches that we had made them much more durable against Banelings, so those are not going to be trading effectively on the side of Reynor.
Indeed. I mean, the Banelings are an incredibly supply-efficient unit. Even though it packs such a punch and costs a lot of money, it's still only half the supply, the same as a Zergling. That's the power of the Baneling. It kind of gives you a supercharged army, but it is a one-shot army. They are a Baneling unit that sacrifices themselves when they explode. It's now Mass Ravager. This is what we call the North American Special. Reynor, an expert in it, despite being from Italy. It's not an army that's very good. The Blinkstalkers are a much better long-term unit than those Ravagers, but those Ravagers, if they can connect the Biles, if they can get these Banelings into a mineral line while they distract their front, then maybe he can do something here.
Yeah, Banelings wrapping around and looking for a huge flank to go onto the backline or perhaps into this mineral line, though there isn't that many probes mining. He's going to get rid of a bunch of the static defense as well as a couple of those warpins, and at the same time he's going to be hitting the front. Those Templars are kind of zoned off, and this is not a great position from Stats, but he's going to make himself some room by blinking to the right side.
Some cute Biles, but supercharged battery just healed those Immortals right on through every single Bile that they ate. Reynor's making the most of the bad situation, but you've got to be really careful. That army looks chunky, it looks scary. Remember, the Ravagers are 3 supply each. They are one of the least supply efficient units in their game for the stats that they carry, and they're very chunky. They look like there's more of them than there really are. If they ever end up toe-to-toe with Zealot Immortal Stalker, they're just going to get annihilated. So those Ravagers need to always be protected by Roaches, Zerglings, Banelings. If Reynor ever loses that core pack of Ravagers, he's pretty much done for.
Yeah, most definitely, and that's why holding chokes is also going to be super important to try and get some value out of the corrosive bile from the Ravagers. And even if those aren't always connecting, they are a great zoning tool. I love what Reynor's doing here with the Banelings, not detonating them onto the army, but just chasing it nearby so that when the army attacks it, they're wasting shots and the Banelings are still doing the full damage.
Yeah, it does take out a few of these Stalkers, keeping it kind of low, but now Stats is into carriers and Reynor is stuck on Ravager Bane. He's got a big economy. 3 carriers building. They don't even need attack upgrades in this scenario because Reynor doesn't have a Spire. Don't get me wrong, Spire, you know, building around a Corruptors is not great, but it's probably his best answer right now is get out about 12 or 13 Corruptors and do what you can, but the Zealot run-bys are finding damage. That Prism on the left has been an absolute menace.
Yeah, and Reynor actually not paying attention, perhaps thinking that he already dealt with those Zealots or that he already allocated some army to it and is gonna lose a base for it. I thought that might have been a mistake from Stats to not go after the drones because it's kind of relying on Reynor not reacting, but Reynor didn't react, or he reacted but then he pulled back and now he's -1 base. He trades ineffectively on the other side. He's still near maxed, but like you said, Roach Ravager not particularly efficient in terms of supply.
No, this is perfectly played by Stats. Stats keeps him busy with an army. Knowing that he's behind, Reynor has to pull his whole army to deal with Stats' army, and Stats just never fully commits. He pokes, he prods, he threatens, he skirmishes, but then he disengages, and it's the Zealots, it's the Prism that does the big damage time and again.
Whoa!
And now...
That
almost gets a carrier, but not quite, not quite. And I mean, you know, hit me once, shame on me. Hit me twice. Oh my god!
Oh, hit him twice!
He just walked into a spore crawler, cat. Oh my god! He just walked a carrier to a spore and lost it.
Yeah, I mean, the pilot of that carrier must have been already pretty tilted from getting hit from the corrosive bile, so he was like, "I'm not taking any more orders from you, man," and he just runs into the spore.
Oh, nonetheless, it still looks like a disastrous situation. Reynor says, let's just try and do damage before the carriers can kill my army. Stats still has Mass Storm on the ground. He's still got lots of Storm Immortal Archon. And Reynor desperately trying to jump on the army and trade before the carriers do their work. But that means he eats drastic storms. That is some bad weather for the Zerg.
Terrible weather, and he's gonna get kited to death as Stats gets his 2nd win of the series. It is a best of 5, however, guys, so if you've been following the tournament, there's been a couple of these, but not too many, and now we are in this stage where all of these matches are going to be best of 5, and so nothing is set in stone yet. But Reynor is going to need a comeback here. That had to be a disappointing loss for him.
Yeah, you know, that was one where he just got tricked a little bit. He came in with the Overlord, he saw a Void Ray and nothing building behind it, But he said, well, that's because you're just going to hide what unit you're building next. No, it actually was real. It was Twilight Council being spent on that gas, and those Adepts came out and really set stats up in a good way. I mean, that Evo chamber wall, where I guess he didn't quite have the creep on the left side of his ramp, so he tried to do this ramshackle one, left an opening in it anyway. That was a real sour turn of events for the young Italian. I think he fought very well from behind there, but stats, he just keeps on surprising him.
Yeah, most definitely. And I was surprised even by Stats' transition from or into the Blinkstalker composition. I'm still not sure that it was the best way to go about it. I think that it kind of offered Reynor perhaps a way back into the game, but I think it was, maybe it's the army composition that he feels comfortable just being out on the map, because Stats is such a safe player that maybe he wants the type of unit that can move out and that can kind of, you know, just kind of dominate the map without risking losing your army until you reach the later stages. Either way, we are going to go to a quick break, and when we come back, more Reynor versus Stats.
Welcome back to the Intel Extreme Masters Katowice. We have got a banger of a first series here as the Protoss Korean player Stats is leading 2-1 against the young Italian Reynor.
Yeah, I can't take my eyes off of that trophy. It is so shiny, Pig. And we can see that Reynor also is still rapping, but this time he took off his hoodie. So, or at least, you know, the top end of the hoodie. So we'll see. He seems pumped. He stopped rapping in between. This is an update for anyone that's watching. He wasn't rapping all the way through, but he just resumed about 30 to 40 seconds ago. I was worried, you know, when he stops rapping, it could be lights out, but no, he's still pumped. He's still ready.
You know what? Taking the hoodie down, is this like the return of the Cracket from back in the day? Maybe, perhaps. I'm not sure. I guess only the results of this game and this series will let us know the power of the hoodie on or off. Let us know if you think the hoodie should be up or down in the chat. Up in the top right-hand side in the blue, representing Clash. Can he make the comeback? He's got to win the next 2 games in a row. It's none other than Reynor.
And in the bottom left-hand side, it is the red Protoss player for Africa Freaks, one of the best Protoss players in the world. It is indeed the Shield of Fire Stats.
Known because if you imagine him as a medieval warrior, doesn't matter how much you slam your sword against him, his shield arm does never ever get tired. He just keeps on going, and his defense is very good. He's kind of, you know, him and Showtime, I feel like basically 2, you know, twins that were separated at birth. They're kind of the same person in many regards. The power of their defense is great, but I mean, Stats is just been next level. The last 4-5 years now of his career, ever since he really ascended in 2016, 2017, and, you know, went from being in every semi-finals to winning every second tournament he was in for a period there. He's just been so damned consistent. He just, unlike these other players who have tournaments every now and then where they just don't look that great, Stats has such a consistent run over the last 5 years, and it's something very impressive to behold. It doesn't matter what the balance is, he's always good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very difficult to make a case against Stats for one of, if not the best Protoss player of all times in StarCraft, because he really has that consistency, right? Like throughout the years, he's really been around. He has admittedly turned it on just maybe 3-4 years. I'm not sure when exactly was his real rise to powerdom, but here we are, and I mean, he is up 2-1 against a Reynor that is in contention for the talks, like they were mentioning on the desk earlier, for best player in the world. And he is with his back up against the wall.
Still lacking a bit of the ability to slay the tip-top Koreans at such an incredible rate as Serral. You know, Serral has been the one who has sometimes just dived straight into the crowd and taken out, you know, a dozen of the best players in the world. And Reynor's gotten to that point in Europe, to be honest. I feel like he's smashing it over there. But, you know, this here is a big test for him. Can he get his feet underneath him in a matchup where his opponents are hiding information, they're not letting him know what's going on, and they're constantly changing things up and using trickery? This is a situation where Reynor is not able to get into that mechanical rhythm like he is in Zerg vs. Terran, where it's just constant Zerglings poking in, Banelings running around, being able to scout what's going on, check what his opponent's doing. There's much more hiding things, there's much more secrecy, and as a result, Reynor's going to need to be very cerebral in how he plays this series.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, because I was going to allude to his CVT. I think that if you put him in CVT against any player in the world, I would favor Reynor. But in CVP, he hasn't looked exactly as dominant, right? Like, he has bled against the likes of Stats, he has bled against the likes of Trap more than once. So, and Zest, even in the group stages, right? And I say even, as if Zest wasn't one of the greatest of all times himself. But yeah, I mean, he really has some tuning to do, whereas Serral seems kind of the other way around almost, right? Where he is not maybe the beast that Reynor is in CVT, at least not from my perception, but in CVP he seems just untouchable.
Reynor, I feel like there's sometimes a bit of an instinctive strength, his ability to kind of smell his way through a StarCraft match and just kind of go with his instincts really is there. And well, the top Protoss players are basically masters of feeding you the wrong information, so your instincts are your downfall. And that's, I think, what Stats has done pretty well this series so far. Reynor, you know, he can't stiffen up. He's still got to play his comfortable form of StarCraft, but already a little more active with some Zerglings on the other side of the map. I think he's going to try and poke around with those a bit more consistently and really try to make sure there's no secrets.
Yes, indeed. I completely agree with you. I think that he is a very instinctive player, a very intuitive, driven player, but I think his analysis is nothing but top-notch itself, and I think that showed in the second game where he kind of had a counter that was very much, I think, pre-planned to what Stats' plan usually is. And I don't know if Stats is going to default to the same thing that he was doing in that game this game, but he certainly has opened up in such a way where it looks like it. There is a second Stargate, there is a Forge. Now this map, I really like it a lot for this type of style because the 4 bases in the very back are very easy to take, and that 4th base in particular is much more easy to secure than just about in any other map, especially against a player like Reynor that's going to be looking for those ramp buys. You can almost fully wall off your 4th base should you, or your 5th base even, should you take it in the right corner.
Indeed, I love that corner base. I don't think we see enough of it either, Cats, from the Zerg players as well. You know, if you take the base down below your natural as Reynor, that's prime pickings for Stats Void Rays, something you got to really watch out for. The Oracle still poking around, sees the Evo chamber. Quite a number of queens out. But Reynor, remember, exact same spawn, exact same map against Zest, and he went for the big queen, Roach, Nidus. And it was crushed by this exact same build order that Stats is doing. Zest went up to, I think it was like 6 or 7 Void Rays, built a lot of cannons, built a bunch of Archons and Immortals, a couple of shield batteries, and he just held it off and shut it down. Does Reynor feel he misexecuted? Is he going to try the same strategy again? So far, it certainly looks like it.
Yeah, you're saying it's gonna be the Queen Roach again, huh? I would love to see the Lurker transition that he was employing in the previous game. It's very similar situations here. There is a Robo for Stats, so we'll see if he chooses to go into Disruptors, but there's also the Templar Archives, which makes me think it's more likely that he's gonna go for Storm once again.
And 11 more drones, so I think you're right, Cats. I think we're gonna see that Lurker style. I wouldn't be surprised to see an Infestation Pit going down and that Hive on the way in the near future. As Reynor drones up the 4th base, he's spreading creep forwards. Storm and a Warp Prism on the way for Stats. The Warp Prism so powerful in that last game, but remember that was from an advantage. It's really hard for a Zerg with no anti-air, who's behind on Ravager Baneling, to deal with a Warp Prism. Don't expect it to be as impactful in this game unless Stats starts to push ahead.
Yeah, but I really like the way that this is shaping up for Reynor because we are having a mirror of that second game where he did manage to take down Stats. And Stats is not really adapting or adjusting as much as I would have liked, though it is extremely difficult from a player perspective to kind of just go against what you have practiced on the spot and do something like, okay, like I'm gonna see how a Disruptor transition works instead of going for the Storm transition that I'm used to, that I know how it works, that I know the ins and outs, that I know how many gateways I need to drop at what times, and that I know everything right about it. So it's much more cleaner to execute what you have practiced, and I think that's what we are seeing from Stats here. But if Reynor takes this game, I think that I'm gonna favor him moving into the last game for the simple reason that both of the games so far that Stats has taken have been on the back of trickery.
Yeah, well, speaking of trickery, I mean, okay, Prism goes down. Bad mistake from Stats there, but that's important. Don't get me wrong, that's big. But what is Reynor's strategy right now? It appears to be just max of Roach Queen walking across the map and swapping into Mutas behind it. What is this? This is bizarre. It's literally a maxed out Roach Ravager Queen waltz across the map. How many queens does he have? Can we see the units tab? This is a lot. This is an insane push. I mean, right now, Psystorm's done. There's a Mortal Cannon battery up. If Stats knew about this, I feel like he'd just be adding even more cannons and batteries. His Oracle flies in and goes down. It's all about those corrosive biles. The magic ability that Reynor seems to do so damned well with is just biling his opponents down.
Yeah, there's a lot of Storm spent, but there is a lot more Storm where that came from. There is, of course, the Queen, so we're going to look for the Templars and the Queens to trade energy on Transfuse and Storms here, and we'll see if Reynor has enough. He's getting choked up a little bit, so those Storms are going to be extra effective, but like you mentioned in the previous game, these are chunky units, so there's only so many units that can fit in that radius, yet still, this is not looking amazing for Reynor, and he's looking to pick off the units that are going to deal with the Mutas best. Void Rays, whatever, you need to get rid of those Archons, and if there was any Stalkers or Templars left, I'm sure that would be a priority, but Reynor actually reinforcing surprisingly somewhat with Roaches. Maybe he feels like momentum is in his favor.
The tanky just block of queens leading the charge through a choke point. And they say, you don't have enough damage, mate. You've built cannons and batteries in your third, in your natural. They're not all here. And I can overwhelm you by pushing these queens across the map. I think even though it looked messy as all hell, Reynor took out all of those fancy units on the ground. Unfortunately, though, 7 more Ravagers and no Mutas on the way. Yeah, this is... I really wonder what the next step is for Reynor, because once those carriers hit the field, he doesn't really have an answer.
Yeah, well, he does have the Spire, so I guess Corruptors will be an option. Perhaps that's what he's anticipating is the carrier transition. That is something that we've seen from stats. The shield battery with overcharge will go down, and there's only 2 Immortals that Reynor's not really going to focus down. Not at the moment anyway. Does he even have link speed? I would imagine that he does. I would love to see some link reinforcements just to seize this opportunity. That Immortal doing a little bit too much will get chased back, and Reynor should just look to take this annoying position between 2 bases to cut off reinforcements, and they're still just roaches in production.
You know what? When in doubt, go back to a hero of your past. And Reynor here, channeling his inner Stefano. Yeah, he added some queens to it, but essentially he said, what's the last thing you'd expect? 200 supply of roaches. And he just goes across the map and hammers it home, and it's been wildly effective. Is Stats going to be able to hold on? I mean, maybe he eventually cleans this up, but he's already taken a lot of damage. I mean, the economy is still there for Stats. Reynor,
really?
I'd love to see some bile spread through the mineral line, just taking out those probes. Ah, look at this defense, dude. Stats just doesn't give up.
Yeah, he really doesn't. He's been kiting towards this defense, and Reynor didn't take that 4th base, right? He has been looking for the kill move. He has been looking for the key units. He has been looking for that Immortal, for those Templar, to make sure that there isn't Archons being morphed. But now carriers are out on the field, and that is going to pose a great threat to Reynor, who does have a Spire. So I've been staring at the production top like a hawk, expecting some sort of Corruptor here. Is there a second Spire going up? Did he cancel the first one?
You know, he cancelled his first one earlier, then rebuilt it, then it finished, and I'm pretty sure it finished. No, it did. He cancelled it a second.
Oh my god! Okay, well that makes more sense.
Third base, or his low ground one. I'm not sure. Either way, he's got queens here, does Reynor, and it's just, it's a matter of scale. It's a matter of numbers. You know, Stats has the high-tech weaponry, but Reynor has an unlimited army of soldiers who are completely devoted to the cause, and they are willing to just charge on in. They don't care. It doesn't matter how many it takes. They're going to overwhelm this handful of Protoss.
That's the beautiful thing about Zerg, right? You're a hive mind, so you don't really have to worry about that type of stuff. If one dies, you're still the hive mind, and look at that! The hive mind himself, me, he's giving the orders. And man, he should be pumped. He should be pumped. We are going to a Game 5, Piggy.
Oh my lord, dude, that's got to be... I'm just... that is cool to see Reynor getting pumped, getting excited, but I'm thinking about this as a problem solver from the Protoss perspective and going, how do you read that this is coming? You're like, okay, he's taking 4 bases, he's droning, there's some queens, some roaches, and you're like, wait, it's just roaches and queens? And there's more than you can imagine filling an entire screen, pushing into your 4th base, and I think at this point, Stats, if he's going to those longer games, I mean, I said it earlier, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think we need to see some disruptors.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think that that is the best answer to aggression like this. If you want to transition into the later stages, I think that Disruptors defensively are so extremely good. They kind of counter everything that Zerg has on the ground. Roaches of creep, not particularly fast, and they kind of clamp up. Ravagers are extremely expensive, difficult to split. Same goes for Hydras. Banelings, not particularly effective, though on the side of being a little bit better alongside Zerglings, but that's not really what the core of these army compositions usually looks like. And even though Reynor didn't go for the lurker transition that we were talking about and that we saw in Game 2, he did something very similar in that he did skip the step of I'm gonna try to kill you at an earlier timing. He went up to a greater number of drones and then did, you know, the Roach Max with those Queens and Ravagers. So it's hitting the 4th instead. And it's hitting, in that sense, later, but it takes advantage of how defensive Stats is earlier, where he has been allocating resources into that static defense earlier, and that static defense earlier didn't pay off, whereas Reynor was droning throughout it. So I think it's the same concept, and I think it's worked out well enough that Stats is going to have to mix it up, go look for more tricks.
Indeed. It's been cool to see this series go back and forth and how the players adapt to each other. Final map, Pillars of Gold, of course, one which is very well balanced. We've seen quite a few back and forth matches on it. But it's interesting to see, at what point does one player back off and respect the other? It feels like so far it is Reynor taking the fight more towards Stats. He's the one who's wanting to batter him down and not let him get to that final stage. And it seems to be that there is a window kind of pre-carrier where the Zerg wants to be getting in there. If a couple of carriers pop out during the fight, that's fine. But once you get 4 carriers, 6 carriers, plus 2 air attack, that's a place Reynor's strategies aren't going to thrive. So I am interested to see how we see this evolve. There is a good amount of space to move forward on Pillars of Gold with Queens across the map. We haven't seen him pull out a Nidus yet. We haven't seen him use any drop play. There are still so many tricks there.
Yeah, but those are tricks on Reynor's side. And if we look at the games, I think that it's Stats that has gotten away with the trickery. I think that as far as Reynor is concerned, if the games just transition into their default settings, then I think he's pretty happy. I recall Scarlet doing something very similar in a series against Neeb, another player that is very similar to Stats and Showtime in the way that he approaches the game, in a way that he wants to get to that late game early, right? And Scarlet was doing something very similar to this with a different set of army composition or of unit composition, right? Where she was going into a lot of drones and going into Hydra Bane later. So it's all about the timings, and really you could replace the Hydras and the Banelings by Roaches and Ravagers, or Hydra Lurker or Lurker Queen like we saw earlier. But the concept is there, and I think that the concept is going to abuse Stats' default. So Stats has to switch something up, but in Game 5 it is so very difficult not to go to your bread and butter.
To break away at this point in the final series, it can be what wins you the tournament. Yeah. And you know what? Certain Terran players were in either player's shoes right now. I think they'd just be proxying some barracks on the other side of the map to simplify things. Say, let's see who has better micro. But you know what? I don't think we're necessarily going to see that. Reynor very well could open with a 12 pool. I doubt he would do it though. And we are going to be going into the final deciding match of this series. Already getting a 5-game series to start the day. In the bottom left, the young Italian looking to put his stamp on this World Championship. In the bottom left, representing Clash, it's Reynor.
And in the top right-hand side, one of the last remaining Protoss in the tournament alongside Cest, it is Stats! Oh man, this is tense. This is tense, Big. I think I'm more nervous than Reynor because I look at him, he's singing away, but oh my god, and here's that drone that we were talking about, right? Doesn't even bother checking if there is a probe at the natural base. It's already rallied to the third.
Of course. Can't be being silly, trying to assume you're going to get your expansion up at your natural. No. Get it down nice and fast on that third base, and probe, of course, coming across this early. It serves 2 functions. It blocks the hatchery, gets to annoy you, but it also scouts that you're not being 12 pulled. So this is a safe move for Stats, something you'd expect in Game 5. It also happens to have that disruptive quality. As you can see, the probe comes in, and whenever it's mining a mineral patch, a drone can't mine it at the same time. So you're going to see Reynor every now and then has to pull a drone and try to attack it or micro it, because what Stats is trying to do is bounce the drones off those mineral patches, as he does there, and just occupy them and then cancel the mining just before he harvests the minerals. So this is one of those awesome pro gamer things where it's just a couple of minerals interruption to your opponent's build, a slight annoyance as he swaps back and forwards between those 2 mineral patches, and he is actually interrupting Reynor's mineral mining a fair little bit.
Oh, I love that income advantage. Yeah, because it is disruptive to 2 mineral lines, and if you know, there was no downtime, which there's always going to be a tiny bit of downtime for that probe, then you're denying 1 entire mineral patch, and 1 entire mineral patch is mined by 2 workers. So the 1 probe is negating near 2 workers, never 2 workers exactly, because again, there's a little bit of downtime for the probe to turn around from 1 mineral patch to the other, but it comes near it, something probably like 1.7, 1.8, which is great, and we saw it reflected in that income graph.
The probe there just chilling at the third base. Of course, the probe scout hanging around usually serves the function of checking you're not being speedling all in. You're just making sure those early larvae are turning into drones. And speaking of Zergling all-ins, of course, can't wait to see our boy Rogue playing later today. In his group stage, he did try to do a speedling drone all-in against Parting, which didn't quite work out. But, you know, that's always in the meta. You always got to check for it as a Protoss player. The moment you get lazy, that's the moment you lose tournament games to Zergling rushes.
Yes, indeed. Now, I don't think we're going to see Reynor try something too strange. I think that if I were in his shoes, I'd be thinking, all right, well, the things that have worked out for me are the good old standard play. And Stats, I'm not sure what he's thinking, but he's opening with a Void Ray once again. I want to say for most of the series that has been the case. And yeah, one drone is one drone too many.
Indeed, Reynor a little slow on the Spore Crawler trick there to defend that. Meanwhile, though, his Zergling being nice and annoying in the main and spotting the Void Ray, which is awesome for Reynor because it means he doesn't necessarily need to sacrifice an Overlord. I don't think he even has an Overlord over there right now, actually, right? He's already halfway home, so he might actually save all of his Overlords. And if you can deny that Void Ray from getting even a single kill, it really does just speed up your early game a little bit. These adjustments, these tiny little boosts get you a few workers sooner, that turns into a few Ravagers sooner, and it makes your mid-game just 1,000 times smoother.
Yeah, loses a drone, but doesn't lose the Overlord. I'd say it about evens out. Of course, the Overlord a little bit more expensive, but the action is a little bit later into the game, so has a little bit less impact. And yeah, I think that all in all, Reynor probably happy with that. Does lose a Zergling as well, so you know, that adds up to something. But all in all, we have, I think, a pretty even game on the back of these happenings, and it's a second target for Stats. This opener has not worked once in the series. It's now the time.
And it's going to be interesting to see exactly what goes on from here. As Reynor's, of course, response to the Void Ray, the quick third base tells him that there can't be like a ridiculously fast attack coming. But he, of course, remembers the Glaive Adepts earlier in the series, so he says, safety Baneling Nest won't hurt. That also tells us that Reynor wants to play Hydra Bane this game, and that's a good change-up. It's going to be a more mobile composition. It's a little more fragile to splash damage, but it can really just come in hard-hitting, mobile, fast. So I expect Reynor to be doing probably 4 base pretty quickly, try to get up to 80 drones. He'll only make Zerglings and Banelings kind of reactively as he needs to, and then it's going to be, bam, get out about 20 Hydras, make a big rounderling Bane, and just start swarming in on Stats. At the very least, you want to keep him off the 4th base for a long time, but hopefully the goal as a Zerg is to kill the army, right? Often you go for the economy to lure the Protoss out, to make him come out and defend his economy, and that's where you try to surround and encircle. So we're going to see a lot of interesting mid-game engagements, but that's what I predict. Stats' goal is going to be, if he's not quite ready for a push, just give up an expansion, fall back, just never lose those core power units. Let that army build up. That's where you get power in Protoss vs. Zerg.
Yeah, most definitely. And we see Stats is going for the same default. It is a Hydra Den like you predicted, P. And Stats has gone for that Forge. He is adding a battery. No doubt cannons will follow suit. And this is kind of what we were prefacing as well, right? It doesn't really matter what the composition is. Or I mean, obviously it matters, right? Different compositions will play out differently and stack up differently against different things, but they will have their strengths and weaknesses. And the core concept that I am looking for is for Reynor to not aggress too early here. And we already have seen him go up to something like 70 workers, but now he's adding a lot of circling, so this might be a little bit earlier timed aggression than in the previous games, where in the previous games I really liked what we were seeing. That's 2 queens already falling to this Void Race.
Yeah, his queens were out of position. They were all down out front, the middle of the map. I think he expected Stats to come down the right side of the map, or was expecting this move not to come quite so early, and price for it.
Yeah, but that's huge. There is a Ling Rambai that gets rid of one of those units before the additional Warpins come into play, and now the Void Rays are having to be recalled defensively. So that will be Reynor's way to deal with that Void Ray aggression and buys him a little bit of time. The Queens are not going to be as essential as in previous games for the single fact that there is Hydras also there for the anti-air.
Dude, this is 66 drone Hydra Bane. He's got a lot of queens as well, so I think he's going to actually bring queens up front to tank for the army. A queen Hydra Bane push is very powerful for killing a 4th base, but can it break into a 3rd? Stats knows about this. He's building extra cannons and shield batteries. I really am curious to see how this goes. You can see the defenses going down. I don't think Psystorm's going to be out in time, so Stats is saying, look, Zealots, Archons, more Void Rays maybe? No, just Zealots and Archons. I'm going to try and overwhelm this. And for Reynor, if his Banelings can connect with those Zealots well enough, if his Hydras and Queens can focus down the Void Rays and the Archons, he is looking for a killing blow. He does not even have a 4th base. This is essentially an all-in attack from Reynor.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how big of a fan I am, but I guess that makes it all the more exciting because I really don't know what's going to be happening here. There are clumps of shield batteries and cannons, so the Banelings always have a target there, and it looks like exactly what they're going to be going after right away. A huge concave of Hydralisks and not enough Warpins here for Stats, who has been taking up quite fast into that storm that's not going to be coming into play. The Archons are going to be morphed on the left-hand side there, and they will come into play, but will they be quick enough?
Oh, the Banelings are stuck behind the Hydras. The Zealots do a great job, and as the Hydra DPS falls, Reynor's army loses a lot of its power. There's still a cannon in there. The Archons do fall down. The Void Rays are still there. Each charge lot warp-in is very dangerous. Banelings are in the mineral line, though. Reynor's getting that economic... Oh, the pylon, the warping gets held off. He immediately warps in again on the right side. More Lings, Hydra's Queen's coming in, but Stats, he doesn't have the numbers as 66 drones. A Baneling Queen timing. And Reynor.
Look at him.
Wow.
You could see his